Tonight, billions around the world were given AstraZeneca vaccines. Sky News hears from one man who claims the pharmaceutical giant exaggerated the jab's effectiveness and downplayed its risks. Jamie Scott suffered a brain injury and fell into a coma just days after being vaccinated.
If there's a risk, if I've got a young family, I would never have taken it.
AstraZeneca has denied all of those claims, but Jamie is demanding compensation, arguing that most of Europe withdrew the vaccine from use, while the UK issued no warning. So why didn't the UK sound the alarm earlier? And 4 years after the pandemic was declared, has access to life-saving injections improved in the developing world? Also coming up, hundreds killed in floods in East Africa. Kenya's Prime Minister says they're victims of climate change. And why Sophie, the Duchess of Edinburgh, has made the first royal visit to Ukraine since Russia's invasion. Plus, the proposed Premier League spending cap, which could hand the advantage to European clubs. That's all coming up on The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Good evening. We begin tonight with the story of one man and his family. Jamie Scott got vaccinated at the height of the coronavirus pandemic to protect the elderly. But he's now suing pharmaceutical giant AstraZeneca, insisting they exaggerated the vaccine's effectiveness and downplayed its risks. The company has denied those claims. Jamie says he's now a shadow of his former self after a serious brain injury, which he says was caused by the vaccine. He's unable to work, partially blind, and has a poor memory. There is no doubt the AstraZeneca vaccine saved millions of lives around the world. Jamie and his lawyers aren't disputing this. They do say that when the rare side effects became apparent and the rest of Europe was withdrawing the jab or reviewing its use, no warnings were issued in the UK. In fact, Prime Minister Boris Johnson was himself vaccinated in front of the cameras and gave a triumphant thumbs up. Tonight, we'll ask how the jab, once described as the jewel in the crown of the UK's rollout, has become entangled in legal arguments. But we begin with Jamie and his wife, who say their lives have been changed forever. They've been speaking to our science correspondent, Thomas Moore.
Jamie Scott's perfectly constructed world collapsed 10 days after having the AstraZeneca COVID jab. He had a loving wife, 2 young boys and a well-paid job. But now he struggles with everyday life, brain damaged as a result, he believes, of blood clotting caused by the vaccine, a rare side effect he was unaware of. He's taking the pharmaceutical giant to court, claiming the vaccine was defective.
I took it to protect the elderly people around me, but I think AstraZeneca and the government need to explain the risk whenever you take medicine, I think, because if there's a risk, if I've got a young family, I would never have taken it.
10 days after having his first dose of the vaccine in April 2021, Jamie woke up with a severe headache, started vomiting and had trouble speaking. He was rushed to hospital, where he was diagnosed with a clot that was stopping blood draining from his brain, as well as a hemorrhage in the brain itself.
They told me he wouldn't wake up. They told me if he did wake up, he would never be the same. We often, especially to our parents when we talk about it, feel like the luckiest unlucky people. We know we were unlucky that it happened to us. We're very lucky that Jamie survived, but our lives are so drastically different.
He hasn't worked since, but under the government's vaccine damage payment scheme, he was given the maximum £120,000, well short of his expected lifetime earnings.
If Jamie was in a car crash, there would have been insurance to cover the injuries and the loss of income that he's experienced. Fair compensation. Like I said, I do not think we should have to lose our house. There has to be protection for those people who did the right thing when the government said it was safe and effective, time and time again.
51 cases have been lodged in the High Court, with victims and grieving relatives claiming damage from the vaccine. Their lawyer says that by mid-March of 2021, other European countries were suspending or withdrawing use of the jab because of the link with clotting. The UK only advised against its use in younger people.
This was very much seen and presented by Boris Johnson and his government at that time as a triumph. And let's remember, there were awful days. The AstraZeneca vaccine was helpful for very many people. We're not disputing that. But I think the extent to which it was politics driving the decision and the extent to which it was clinical decision makers driving the decision is yet to be fully resolved.
The AstraZeneca vaccine is still licensed but not used in the UK. It is in many other countries and is estimated to have saved 6 million lives in its first year. The Department of Health said it doesn't comment on ongoing litigation or specific cases. AstraZeneca says it updated product information for the vaccine in April 2021 to reflect the possibility in very rare cases of blood clots. A spokesperson added the AstraZeneca Oxford vaccine has continuously been shown to have an acceptable safety profile, and regulators around the world consistently state that the benefits of vaccination outweigh the risks of extremely rare potential side effects. Jamie and Kate feel they've been left out in the cold. He did what he felt was his duty by having the jab, but without the safety net to replace lost income, he would think twice next time.
It's great to be alive. And I do enjoy that with the boys, and that's what I do enjoy. That is Kate and the boys and family. And I think I'm just happy to be alive. But it is a shadow, and every day is just difficult.
And we'll be speaking to Thomas in a moment. But first, I just want to give you a sense of the scale of the AstraZeneca rollout. Now, within 11 months of the jab first being approved, over 2 billion doses were supplied globally. That's across more than 170 countries. At one point, the vaccine was being used in all 7 continents. A number of European countries, including Denmark, Germany, France, Ireland and Italy, then decided to temporarily suspend its use. That's after a small number of blood clots incidents emerged in March 2021. The majority of countries eventually resumed its use, in some cases limiting them to certain age groups. Now let's bring in Thomas, who joins me now live. And I mean, Thomas, we can see there what Jamie was saying, that he thought he was doing the right thing. Like so many millions of people, that they took this vaccine, even though there were concerns at the time about how quickly they were being developed. And we were hearing murmurings around, these blood clots. But it was like a social pact, wasn't it? It was to protect other people.
Yes, this is about a social pact, and it requires both trust in the vaccine and, of course, trust that there will be help there should things go wrong in very rare circumstances. And a number of countries around the world do have no-fault compensation schemes. The University of Oxford looked at some of them running around the world, and there were 137 countries that were covered, some of them by multinational schemes by COVAX and UNICEF and so on. And the idea is that they do provide some kind of safety net for people who are affected. Now, they cover different things to different levels, but I think what this court case is going to really lead to, and put aside the legal arguments on both sides, is some thought on how we can fairly compensate people who are caught out by what they say are side effects as a result of vaccines, and whether there is some fairer way, something much closer to car insurance, for example, if you are damaged or injured in a car crash, that the compensation will be there for not just your ongoing care, but also for any loss of income that you have for the rest of your life. So that, I think, is something that will come out of this. It's something that people have been campaigning for quite some time, but it hasn't resulted in any change here in the UK, and that's why people are having to go to court.
Yeah, and this particular case sort of centres on warnings being issued in other countries, but not in the UK.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, as you covered in the graphic there were other countries, Denmark, Norway, some provinces in Canada that did restrict use of the vaccine on a precautionary basis. And in fact, in Denmark, they were the first country to actually withdraw it altogether, partly because, of course, the rapid rollout of the mRNA vaccines by Pfizer and Moderna, which were showing to be more effective effective in some clinical trials, and there were some countries that judged that, well, why take any risk, and took it out of circulation on a precautionary basis. But AstraZeneca is standing by its vaccine. It is adamant that it is safe, that it is effective, and it will contest these claims in the High Court.
OK, Thomas, thank you so much for all of that. OK, let's bring in Professor Petro Terblanche, Chief Executive of Afrigen Biologics, a biotech company based in South Africa, which has produced its own COVID-19 vaccine. Thank you so much, Professor, for joining us. I mean, you were listening there to some of the reports that we've been covering around the legal cases now surrounding AstraZeneca. Are you surprised? I mean, of course, AstraZeneca denies these claims, and these are claims of some of these people who have taken the vaccine and say these are the risks and the side effects weren't explained to them properly. But so many years now since these vaccines were developed, are you surprised that these legal battles are now emerging?
No, I'm not. So we must understand that during the COVID-19 pandemic, it was unusual circumstances. It was unusual demands to protect 8 billion people from a pandemic and a pathogen that was unknown to human health. There was the speed of developing vaccines, and there were a number of platforms utilized, including the AstraZeneca Oxford University platform, the mRNA platforms. The need was to protect the human population, and it's a risk-based approach. My belief is that public safety and public health must be almost foremost and most important. But in unusual circumstances and the need for speed, you sometimes have unusual circumstances that evolves. Vaccines, well, no medical product are without side effects. We know that. And we continuously have to balance risk and benefit. And I think what is most important for the pharmaceutical companies to retain the trust of the human population is to declare and to demonstrate that the safety of human health is put above monetary value. And I think that will install the trust that is required by the global population.
I guess with all of these vaccines, including the one that you developed, are you saying that ultimately there were always going to be risks involved, and especially given the speed in which these vaccines were developed, and questions around the speed were being asked? But I guess, was it also a question of not having a choice at the time?
Yes, I think the pandemic called for unusual circumstances. Where we are now, and the vaccine that's developed by Afrigen Biologics here in Cape Town, supported by the World Health Organization and partners, is that we have put utmost care into the preclinical development to ensure that we have the highest safety standards. But we have the luxury of time now. We have the luxury of spending the time and the essence of taking 2 or 3 years to take a vaccine candidate to a point where we validate a platform. These are very different objectives.
So, Professor, those who were hesitant and at the time were refusing to take any of these vaccines, really, and were saying it's developed too quickly and they don't trust it, and I guess society shunned them at the time. Was that the right thing to do as well? Or again, are you going back to the fact that this was done at speed, there was no choice that people had, and we were trying to all protect ourselves? I mean, we were talking earlier with my colleague about vaccines being a sort of social pact. You don't do it just for yourself, you do it to protect others.
So I don't think we should take the individual choices away ever. I think that choice is what human beings has a right to. What we need to understand is during the pandemic, the objective was to reduce deaths, hospitalization, and morbidity while protecting a global population. If we do not have vaccination, which we've seen in Africa and many of the low middle income countries, we have the development of variants. And the Omicron case was a case in time, where if we do not vaccinate speedily, we increase the risk of development of variants, which means that we expand and we prolong the pandemic, which means that we have the impact from socioeconomic, disease burden, morbidity, mortality, and also economic impact globally. We enhance that. So it was a careful balancing exercise that the public health and global health community had to make.
And now, I guess, several years on since these vaccines were developed, what lessons do you think have been learned? Because there are many scientists who say we are potentially on the heels of the next pandemic.
We have learned so many lessons. The first one is that where vaccines are manufactured matters. If we do not diversify manufacturing of vaccines to low middle income countries, we will not be able to serve the human needs in the case of a pandemic. If we do not pay careful attention to development of multiple platforms that is amenable and suitable to develop safe and effective vaccines, the world will not be prepared. If we do not have leadership that makes decisions around where not only vaccines, but medical countermeasures, vaccines, diagnostics, therapeutics are distributed across the world, we will have the same devastating impact we had with the COVID-19 pandemic.
OK, Professor Terblanche, thank you very much for joining us here on the programme.
Thank you.
You're watching The World with me, Yalda Hakim. After the break, a dam bursts in Kenya, killing at least 40 people. We'll have the latest on efforts to help those stranded by the floods as East Africa struggles with unusually heavy rainfall.
I'm Stuart Ramsey and I'm Sky's chief correspondent.
Well, there's a real sense now that people are beginning to expect that this whole airlift is coming to an end, and they're really, really desperate. We saw snatch squads going in, grabbing people and putting them into trucks. You either live and recover, or you die.
Okay, so that's like a war.
That's the war, yes.
We help you understand the world with us.
Over the past 24 hours, the soldiers have been attacked on a number of occasions. It's really sending a clear message that Venezuela is eager for change. We've been crushed.
We take you to the heart of stories that shape our world.
They were convinced the United States would become hooked. Well, they were right.
Well, enormous explosion has just come down. I think it was a monster just landed in between us.
The information on this could bring down the entire network, not just in Iraq and Syria, but across the world.
It's got out of control, but the pig withdrawn. It's so hot.
Welcome back. Next tonight, we're going to talk about Kenya and the torrential rain that's battered much of eastern Africa over the weekend. At least 45 people died after a dam burst its banks in the early hours of this morning. Meanwhile, thousands have been displaced by intense downpours in neighbouring Tanzania and Burundi. Here's our Africa correspondent, Yusra El-Bagir.
Trees ripped out of the soil and survivors left to assess the damage as disaster hits western Kenya. Days of torrential rainfall burst through a mud-filled river tunnel and sent flash floods crashing into nearby villages, sweeping away dozens of homes as residents slept inside and trapping cars in a web of debris.
I woke up at 3 a.m. to help rescue people. I have made 5 trips in the police van carrying bodies of victims. In the last trip, we took out bodies of 4 children, 2 women and 1 man.
The water came gushing down from up there and has swept away people's stuff. Families have lost beds, property, cars are struck downstream, so we would appreciate any help we can get.
Kenya Red Cross says that at least 109 people were rescued and rushed to nearby hospitals. And authorities have confirmed that at least 45 people have died, 17 of them children. Kenyan schools remain closed after the Easter break, following weeks of heavy rains that have hammered the region, as the El Niño phenomenon shifted from drought to widespread flash floods, also impacting nearby countries Uganda, Burundi, and Tanzania, where at least 155 people have been killed. In Kenya, the death toll is still rising. And the Kenya Red Cross remains on high alert as flooding claims over 140 lives and has displaced 185,000 people.
We are appealing to the public to be conscious. The water levels are going up, they were advised. Even Kenya Red Cross has sent a warning message to all citizens that, don't try moving water.
Meteorologists warn of another week of torrential rains as life comes to a standstill for many Kenyans, warned to avoid the water and worried the water will come to them. Yusra El-Bagir, Sky News.
I'm joined now by Dr. Ahmed Idris, Secretary-General of the Kenya Red Cross Society. Thank you very much, Dr. Ahmed, for joining us here on the programme. Given the scale of the devastation, are there fears that the death toll could continue to rise?
Most certainly, we're expecting more rains in the coming days and weeks. So we expect and are prepared for an increase in numbers of the people displaced, including possibility of others losing their lives, unfortunately.
And just talk us through the rescue operation and what your teams are doing on the ground, because, of course, we understand that over 100,000 people have been displaced. There must be still many trapped in some of these remote areas.
So, yeah, a number of families and communities are cut off from the rest of the country. So our priority right now is to reach them, those who are in need of evacuation, to benefit from immediate and urgent evacuation. Those who are stranded are not able to access supplies from the rest of the country to get essential items such as medication and food reaching them. As we speak, the most concerning part of our work is on search and rescue. Individuals who are missing, either who are believed to have been washed off by the raging waters or who are completely marooned in areas that we are not aware of. So that is taking a bit of our time and energy.
Yeah, because it looks like many of the roads are cut off as well, so it would be difficult to get to them.
Yes, actually, our estimate is about 42 main roads are completely cut off. And so it hampers and slows down the search and rescue process in itself. That is a major impediment to our work. So how to reach the population. We are now deploying more assets, including air assets, to reach population that have been cut off.
And those who have been evacuated, where are they being taken?
We have about 97 displacement camps around the country, hosting from a small number of household displaced as small as 20 to in some places internal displacement camps with as many as 2,000 households. So a number of people are being accommodated also by the communities, relatives, families and friends.
Just talk us through the heavy rains and the flash flooding, that's devastated much of East Africa, especially Kenya. I mean, is this rare for this time of year?
First, this is not an isolated incident, and we have to remember that over the last 20 years, extreme weather events have increased up to fivefold, and that's a product of climate change. So we're anticipating that the wet seasons will be getting wetter, and the dry seasons and hot seasons will be getting hotter. And so it's that context that Kenya, Tanzania, and a number of countries in Africa are now bearing the brunt of these extreme weather events. We are in the long rain season. Ordinarily, we expect to have rains during this period. However, the intensity of a short period of time, that is what is causing massive flooding.
And, you say that this isn't an isolated incident, but you've seen it get worse over 20 years. What can authorities do to sort of safeguard and protect the population so that we don't see, rising death tolls?
We first have to focus on reassessing our strategies for development planning. We have to review our built infrastructure and how we're interacting with the built environment. And that's one of the priority areas, especially in urban spaces and urban centers. Right now, which is been very rare, majority of the people displaced in the country are in Nairobi. That is an indication of the fact that this particular flooding is not just about the weather, it's an interaction between the weather and geography. So we have to integrate our disaster risk management and planning as part of the wider development planning. So we will be encouraging more effort in environmental conservation, watershed management, and most importantly, building the resilience of communities.
Yeah, I mean, just to that point, I mean, the Horn of Africa is one of the most climate vulnerable regions in the world.
Correct. Unfortunately, we are bearing the brunt of the effects of climate change when we are the least contributors to in terms of the impacts of climate change. So that's ideally where the challenge lies. As we speak, the disaster cycles are such that they are affecting the same population, the same communities with extreme events, so from drought to floods. And that has, over a period of time, weakened the ability of these communities to live and to withstand emergencies, including these floods. This means there has to be a global conversation around how we support communities to adapt and how we finance the adaptation
but
processes.
That global conversation is not being had, is it? And we often hear from and see the developing world at the forefront of climate change and really bearing the brunt of the decisions of those countries who are causing a lot of these issues. In fact, Kenya is just coming out of one of its worst droughts, a drought that it sort of had to deal with for 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, the leadership of the developed countries have to remember that this is not a theoretical discussion. It is these are things that are affecting people's lives every day. Young children losing their lives. Majority of the people who are bearing the brunt of the floods and extreme weather events are women and children. We have to look at this as a moral and ethical obligation to provide the sufficient level of finances to the developing communities, communities in developing countries to be able to change with the impact of climate change. And also, in addition, we have to have a concerted effort towards reducing the greenhouse gas emissions to reduce the impact of climate change.
Okay, Dr. Ahmed Idris, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
This is The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Next up, the Ukrainian families reunited after being taken to Russian territory. They were separated by war. Find out how Qatar played a role. Welcome back. Qatar has recently welcomed 20 Russian and Ukrainian families, including 37 children, as part of its efforts to reunify families separated by the war. The government in Kiev estimates over 19,000 Ukrainian children have been deported and forcibly displaced from their homes to both Russia and Russian-occupied territories since the invasion began in February 2022. We spoke to 3 Ukrainians who went to Qatar to be reunited with their loved ones.
My name is Katerina Skopina. My child was abducted by my husband's parents while I was held captive in the Russian Federation.
My name is Sergei Sentisky. I am the biological uncle of Lev and Jasmine.
My name is Victoria, and I lived in the Luhansk region when the occupation began. Now my nephew, Alexander, has been brought here.
The child was in the Donetsk region. It's 60 kilometers from Mariupol. When the large-scale invasion of Ukraine began on February 21st, my husband took our child, put her in the car, and brought her to his parents, and asked them to take Anna Maria in our car to my parents because they live in Lviv, which is in the western part of Ukraine. They didn't do that. They then forcibly changed the child's citizenship, through which they received money as they took guardianship over her.
When all this started, about a year ago, they moved to the Moscow region and stayed there. For the last 6 months, the children haven't even attended school. There was no decent food.
My sister, along with Alexander's older brother, died during the war on July 7th, 2022. From that moment, I began to deal with his evacuation from the occupied territory. The Russians did not permit him to leave and found a guardian for him in the occupied territory. They gave him a Russian passport.
With children, of course, they want to indoctrinate them, what they do with them and where they settle them. Here, we are very grateful to Qatar for helping and participating in negotiations. I don't know how it's called, really. They help return children home, because what Russia is doing is genocide.
It seems to me there is a divine retribution. I think that's enough.
I would prefer Putin to withdraw all troops from the territory of Ukraine and finally leave us alone.
3 families there reunited with the help of Qatar. Well, let's stay with the situation in Ukraine. And the Duchess of Edinburgh is on a visit to Ukraine, the first member of the royal family to do so since Russia's invasion. The Duchess met President Zelensky and the First Lady of Ukraine, delivering a message to them on behalf of His Majesty the King. Well, let's bring in Sky's Matthew Thomas, who can tell us a little bit more. And Matt, I mean, you know, this is the first time we've seen a royal in Ukraine. Tell us why she was there.
Yes, and a senior royal at that. You know, the Duchess of Edinburgh is very much a senior working royal. As you say, it's the first time that any member of the royal family has visited Ukraine since the beginning of the Russian invasion. And look, these things don't happen by accident. It was done at the request of the Foreign Office. The royal family are, of course, a key part of Britain's so-called soft power and diplomatic relations around the world. And as you say, the Duchess met with the President of Ukraine, President Zelensky, and his wife, Olena, and delivered them a letter handwritten by the King himself. But there's also an important personal dimension to this visit. The Duchess Sophie, it's a cause that's quite close to her heart. She's the champion of something called a UK initiative called Preventing Sexual Violence in Conflict Initiative. She's quite often visited conflict zones around the world to highlight the impact of war, particularly on women and children. And to that end, she met with some survivors of conflict-related sexual violence. She met with people displaced by the war in Ukraine. And she visited a mass grave in Bucha, a town which, of course, shocked the world when it came under Russian occupation just at the very beginning of the war, and a number of reports of extraordinary human rights abuses were documented. But while she was in the country, she gave a short speech saying how happy she was to be there on one level, but also how sad that she had to be there under those circumstances. We can bring you a little bit of that now.
So today has been a happy day that I have finally been able to get to Ukraine, and I'm very happy to be here on my first visit. A sad day, because of course it means while I'm here I've been learning more about the situation in all its realities, which of course is sad. The human cost of war is very real, and I know that everybody here feels it very intensely.
And of course, Matt, the Duchess isn't the only royal to show support for Ukrainians and this war against Russia.
No, very much so. I mean, the King has led from the front in that respect. I mean, just in February, to mark the 2-year anniversary of the conflict, he issued a very strongly worded message. He condemned Russia's unprovoked attack. Last year, Prince William visited the Polish border to show support for British troops and the work that they were doing there. Last year, the King himself invited President Zelensky to Buckingham Palace in person. And in fact, just this February gone, Queen Camilla invited Olena Zelenska, President Zelensky's wife, to Clarence House. But I think the point about this visit today is that it is, as we say, the first visit in the country from a senior royal, and I think that says something about not just the support from the royal family, but from Britain itself at a time when, let's face it, there have been some questions around the extent of the West's commitment to the Ukrainian cause.
Matt, thank you so much for all of that update. That was Matthew Thompson joining me there. Now, we've been speaking a lot about migration here on the programme after the government here forced through controversial legislation declaring that the East African country Rwanda is safe. Ministers had hoped that their Rwanda policy would have a speedy impact, but now Ireland is claiming that the threat of being sent overseas was responsible for migrants coming there instead. Our Ireland correspondent Stephen Murphy has been hearing from those who made the journey.
More migrants making the Channel crossing today. Home Office figures show more than 7,000 have arrived in the UK so far this year, but will it be their final destination? The Irish government thinks many migrants, now fearful of being sent to Rwanda, will cross another sea, travelling to Northern Ireland before arriving here in Dublin. The government has simply run out of accommodation, so male refugees must camp out in a makeshift tent city outside the asylum office. Jad is from Jordan and came to Dublin from London via Belfast. He says the Rwanda policy is the reason why.
Because I was afraid and heard from a lot of people that they will send you to Rwanda. So I was so afraid that they will do this. So Ireland was much better. It's a very cruel policy, to be honest. It's not good.
Sammy from Nigeria was living in Leicester. He's another new arrival from across the Irish border. He didn't feel safe showing his face on camera.
I wanted to seek asylum in the UK, but I heard about the Rwanda bill from friends, and I felt I wouldn't want to go back to Africa because I don't feel safe in Africa.
As immigration becomes a hot topic in Irish politics, Dublin reckons 80% of refugees here have come from Britain via the open border with Northern Ireland. There's no way of knowing for sure, and some dispute that estimate. The Prime Minister today ruled out any deal with Ireland to accept returned refugees, something echoed by his Northern Ireland Secretary.
Any agreement on returns, we've been told all the way through since we left the European Union that the UK must deal with the European Union as a whole entity.
The Irish Deputy Prime Minister tried his best to downplay tensions between the two governments.
Both governments are committed to working together in the time ahead to dealing with issues, many issues, including migration. There is no doubt that migration is an enormous challenge.
It's hard to escape the sense that many stuck here feel they're now being treated as little more than political pawns. The people that end up here on this street in Dublin really don't care about deterrent policies or intergovernmental wrangling. They just want a roof over their head, and if it can't be in the UK, then they hope it will be here in Ireland.
The Irish government fought long and hard for an invisible border during Brexit. Now it must figure out how to deal with one of its consequences as Britain's Rwanda policy increases the pressure. Stephen Murphy, Sky News in Dublin.
A violent coup and a newly crowned prince as leader may sound like something out of a Hollywood movie, but it was in fact a plan being worked on by one of Germany's most dangerous far-right groups. It begs the question, why is the country seeing a resurgence in organised extremism? Have a listen.
It's one of the largest criminal cases in German history. A group of far-right conspiracy theorists charged with high treason, attempted murder and plotting a coup to violently overthrow the country's parliament and install this aristocrat, Prince Heinrich XIII of Reuss, as Germany's new leader. So what exactly happened? Police uncovered the suspected plot in a series of nationwide raids on December 7th, 2022. More than 3,000 police officers took part. 25 suspected members of the far-right Reichsbürger group were arrested. It's alleged the plotters believed that Germany was being ruled by a shadowy deep state, which among many crimes detained and tortured children.
Militante Reichsbürger verbindet der Hass.
Militant Reichsbürger are united by the hatred of democracy, of our state, and of people who stand up for our community. That is why we are taking action against them with all the force of the law.
The Stuttgart trial is the first of 3 separate court proceedings, split up over time and space for security and logistical reasons. Prosecutors today said the men believed in a conglomerate of conspiracy myths, including QAnon ideology, and were planning to negotiate a post-coup order with Russia. The proceedings of the 3 cases are expected to last well into next year.
Well, fascinating detail there, and we'll continue to cover that trial and the growth of the far right in Germany over the next few months. This is The World with me, Yalda Hakim. After the break, a move that could change the shape of top-tier football. Premier League clubs have voted in favour of a spending cap, but what will it mean in practice?
And coming up on Sky News at 10, we'll have the latest from Scotland after the First Minister resigns and what it means for the SNP. Plus, more boats crossed the Channel today and a makeshift migrant camp is erected in Dublin. See you for more at 10.
So it started in 2014. Where we saw a documentary where the police were being literally harpooned by the press over not reducing the number of knife incidents or crimes on the London streets. It was all about London then. So we stepped forward and we said to the Home Office, could you support us in building a national monument against violence that would be the UK's visual symbol against our intolerance to violence? So they agreed. We wrote to all the chief constables. We had donations from all the British constabularies, all 43 of them. And we built this national monument against violence. We're metal workers here. We're not from the establishment or from the infrastructure of the UK. We're just simply metal workers stepping forward to try and do something for the UK. The backing always comes through the parents. It does not generally always come through the regular sources that you'd imagine, like the politicians. The Angel has successfully travelled to nearly 50 cities and towns. During that time, over those 10 years, there's been a lot of political awareness that we've gained in that generally there are cities and towns that will prevent the Angel from visiting them. If they feel that the public or the parents are accepting of their circumstances or they want to brush it under the rug, they will genuinely just prevent the Angel and its educational programme travelling to their city. We specialise in making art or sculpture out of scrap or waste product. So when we had the first delivery of blades come in, which was actually from our own constabulary from West Mercia, we were expecting a bin or some plastic trays or something that would contain the blades, but no, we received our first delivery in a builder's skip, and 20 or 30% of those blades that arrived were in biohazard tubes, and they were all infected with blood, so they all needed sterilising, and that was really totally out of our comfort zone.
Welcome back. These days, it's hard to talk about top-tier football without money coming into the conversation. Well, Premier League clubs have now agreed, in principle, new rules which will cap how much they can spend on players. Well, let's discuss this further with our sports correspondent, Rob Harris, who can tell us more. Rob, just tell us what's actually been agreed today.
Well, what's been agreed is a form of spending cap, and they've still got to finalise the precise details of the rules, but they have the agreement of the majority of Premier League clubs to progress with it. And what it would create is anchoring the maximum amount a Premier League club can spend on wages for players and transfers to the lowest amount earned by a club from television money and prize money. So if it was in place last season, the maximum any club could have spent would have been about £500 million under one potential ratio that's being talked about. That'd be 5 to 1. It could be 4.5 to 1. So this is just one aspect of a broader new set of cost controls.
I guess the other question then, Rob, is will it actually happen? And if so, when?
Well, it might not be fully in place for another season or so. They are finalising the legalities, and we've seen just recently in the Premier League how clubs have been docked points for breaching the current financial rules, and that's created all sorts of legal challenges. The current financial rules, incidentally, about curbing losses. These are all about curbing spending, in many ways curbing the power of the elite, wealthiest clubs.
I guess then it begs the question, will this hopefully finally create some kind of level playing field?
That certainly is the hope for many. Now, for years, we've had something called financial fair play that actually didn't make the playing field any leveller. It was actually more about trying to attempt to level out the finances, to make clubs more sustainable. And now this will inhibit the ability of even the richest clubs to be able to spend as they wish. It all combines with UEFA, the European governing body that runs the Champions League, bringing in new cost control rules. So that will see clubs eventually only able to spend 70% of their revenue on player signings, on agent fees and salaries. And the Premier League has adopted a form of that as well. So there is some unity in parts of Europe, but this extra level of anchoring is to ensure that even if a club, say, generated £1 billion, they couldn't just spend 70% of that. That would be brought down even further. So the Premier League would maintain a certain degree of competitiveness, which maintains the value of things like particularly the television rights.
Rob, does this mean the domestic league will no longer be attractive for foreign owners?
Well, some foreign owners might well be in favour of these rules, because what they allow them to do is to tell the fans, yes, we might want to sign that player, but unfortunately we can't, because the rules stop us spending as much as we would wish. But for other owners, say the Saudi state backers of Newcastle United, they're trying to play catch-up with the established elite. So perhaps they would be relishing the ability to spend more freely, to suddenly bolster that squad, to be able to become part of the big time. But, ultimately there's a desire to prevent the spiralling wages and transfer fees that we've seen over many years, and to curb some of those excessive within the game. And in some way, although we're not quite there, adopting some of the American style sort of things like, luxury tax taxes, as they call it in the US. We're not quite the level of drafting players, but certainly the principle of US sport is trying to create a more level playing field, and certainly in the Premier League, that's what they're hoping to achieve by different means.
Rob, thank you, as always, for bringing us up to speed. Now, I'm just going to bring you some news that's developing in the last few minutes. As we've been reporting for the last few months, really, there's been a lot of discussion around a potential ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. And Hamas delegation was actually in Cairo today. They were talking about potential frameworks on how to reach a deal that both sides could agree on. We're now being told that the Hamas delegation has left Cairo and they are going to return with a written response to that Gaza ceasefire proposal. Now, we can talk you through what that potential latest proposal is, which Israel helped craft, but it hasn't fully been agreed to on both sides. The agreement is looking at laying out two phases, and the first of which calls for 20 to 33 hostages to be released over several weeks in exchange for the pause and the release of Palestinian prisoners. So that's phase one, where Hamas would agree to releasing between 20 and 33 hostages over several weeks in exchange for the release of Palestinian prisoners. Now, there's a second phase to this, and sources close to the discussions have described it as the restoration of sustainable calm, during which the remaining hostages and captive Israeli soldiers and the bodies of hostages would be exchanged for more Palestinian prisoners. So it really was that talk around how much of that ceasefire would result in the end of the fighting in Gaza. And this line, restoration of sustainable calm, is something that Hamas was going back and forth on, whether they would agree to it, what sustainable calm actually meant. Would that mean an end to the bloodshed, an end to the fighting in Gaza? So we have been told that tonight a Hamas delegation has left Cairo, and they say they will return again with a written response to that ceasefire proposal. That's according to Egyptian news outlets who are reporting this. So some development there on that Hamas delegation, which has now left Cairo, to return with that written response. Now, we were talking there about